Carl T. Smith, when people refer to you as a writer, what does that mean to you?
I think it's something that I kind of always dealt with, that I wanted to write. It was, in the beginning, it was an emotional outlet for me, what I would call bibliotherapy. That's a word I coined. When I had problems, I'd write about them, usually in story form. I never thought of myself as a writer because I thought to be a writer you had to be published. I no longer think that. I think anyone who writes can call themselves a writer if that's the way they perceive themselves. I was lucky, I was fortunate that I was able to get published. At that point, I began to really think of myself as a writer, which actually put a lot of pressure on me to produce. And that was difficult to deal with in the beginning. But, I consider myself as much an entertainer as I do a writer, if that answers your question.
Well, let's explore that entertainer aspect of things, because in your early career, that's exactly what you set out to do, to make music and to sing.
Correct, and to act and direct plays and things of that nature. And I really didn't think of writing in that sense until a little pat on my own back here. I started getting fan letters about people who, enjoyed the book so much they had difficulty putting them down. And of course, the highlight was a year ago, April, when I got an email from a Marine staff sergeant, and it was out of the blue, and it simply said, "Mr. Smith, your books are awesome. Thank you for writing them. They have helped me through many sleepless nights since I returned from my 4th tour in Afghanistan." Well, to tell you I broke out in chill bumps about that would be an understatement. I think helping someone get through a night when they have the horrors of war coming down on them is certainly a positive review in an entertainment sense as well as perhaps a psychological sense. And then there are, of course, the comments I get from people who say, I can't wait for the next book, which means I've at least tweaked their interest. So it's an entertainment for some people. For some people, if I'm lucky, I can make a point. I don't consider myself wise, but every once in a while you're given a little gift when you're writing, and I look forward to those.
So it's about what's at the other end, what may have begun as bibliotherapy, as you call it, as an opportunity, as an outlet. Then when you get to the other side and suddenly you're published and people are responding to what you write, that's a whole different ballgame.
Oh, yes. It puts on some pressure. I have 2 or 3 people who I run things by. Say, am I maintaining the same standard of the characters and of the quality of the writing? Is the story interesting? Does it make you want to turn the page? You try to find defining things that will keep someone going. In my book, Matthew's Island, the first line of the book is, quote, "It was the first visitor he had had in 28 years. Well, in my mind, if that doesn't make you read the second sentence, then I've failed, but I think it's probably one of the best opening lines I've ever written. Throughout the course of the book, and I never know where it's going because I don't plan ahead, I don't outline, I just let the characters carry me where they will, and fortunately I've been lucky that they've carried me to good places.
What makes a good story? You referenced defining things and catching the reader's interest. But in your opinion, what really makes a good story?
Well, I think it has to have direction. And I think the characters have to have something that every reader can associate with themselves. If they don't have the depth of a parking lot puddle. I need to feel the characters and feel their emotions. And if I feel their emotions, then hopefully the reader will. And I'm sure when you watch a film or you read a book, that some capture you and some don't. And I think the story itself, the plot, is really secondary to the development of the characters and the ability of the reader to associate themselves with the characters. I want something in that character that everybody can relate to and say, oh, I felt that way, that's part of me, or I never realized that. If I can do that, then I've succeeded, and I think the story has succeeded, and that's the most important thing.
And you've had the distinct advantage with your characters over several books to truly develop them. That in my opinion, would be a bit of a blessing and a curse.
You hit the nail on the head. It is a blessing and it is a curse. When I read a book that stands alone, not in a series, so to speak, I think it's very difficult to fulfill the characters unless you write a 3,427-page book, and that leaves me a little cold. However, when you write a series with continuing characters, you have to keep the characters at the same level, and you have to find new directions for them. We as people change on a daily basis, basically, based on our experiences. And you have to find different planes within the character that you want to explore. And too many times, series books or follow-ups, they become almost like automatons. It's the same story with the same characters in a different setting. And I never wanted to do that. I have always wanted to make all of the situations unique and not just good guy, bad guy, caught him and put him in jail type of things. And nature plays a very important part in my books, and it's man's relationship to nature and how nature defines man, and that opens it up a little bit for me. But it is difficult to have a continuing character, because how do you make them unique? How do you make them new with each book? And that requires depth. That's what I'm looking for.
Man's relationship to nature, man versus nature?
No, man is a part of nature. If we look at nature, we can see everything in nature. We can see ourselves within every part of nature. And it's only when we ignore it that we make big mistakes. And I'm not talking about climate change or anything like that. But it can teach us so many lessons. The leading character in my books is a painter and does wildlife paintings. And so he does paintings based on fear. He does paintings based on exhilaration, terror, whatever, that nature and man feel, and even love. There are certain species of nature where they mate for life. So I think all of those things are reflective of what we are.
Are you a painter, Carl T. Smith?
No, I am not. But I studied art history in college, and many of my friends are artists, and that has been a help to me with sounding like I know a lot about art that I probably don't know.
What about the consuming public? The way, you've had the experience of writing over decades. In your opinion, has the consumer changed in the way that they read books, the way they look at books?
Very definitely. The publishing industry right now is, and I don't mean this to be sexist in any way, but it's dominated by the females. If you look at the bestseller list, the greatest number of books on the bestseller list are women. And part of that is because of the interest in romance novels. Am I anti-romance novels? No, I don't. I don't denigrate any writer who writes his or her own books. There is one who doesn't do that, but I won't mention him. So I think this affects me and affects other male writers in the sense that we, in the past, if you look back at the early writers like Dashiell Hammett and Chandler and so forth, the women in the characters in the books were window dressing. They didn't really do a whole lot. I try to write about strong women and enigmatic men and put them together. And one is no more important than the other. And I think the perception of the readers today is that they categorize everything. I think, I've had people say when I did book signing, I only read romance novels. I only read nonfiction. I only read sniper novels. And it puts the writer in an awkward position as to, if your primary goal is to sell, which should not be your primary goal, in my opinion, you'd have to take those things into consideration. I certainly don't. I'm not John Grisham or Stephen King, and so I don't have those kinds of shackles around me that I have to deal with the popular trends and things like that. I just write what I feel like writing, and you like it or you don't.
Your characters, you talked about how often they will lead you along the way. You don't have an outline, you just let them carry you. I've talked to many authors who reference having a character actually speak to them. I mean, actually have a voice within their heads. Have you ever experienced that?
Well, to a degree, I think. People have asked me how much of Sam Larkin is me, and I always answer all but the brave parts. But I think probably the statement that I received one time, or the interview I received one time, that brought that to mind a lot was an interviewer, a male. He said, "I've heard so many women say you write very well from a woman's point of view. How do you do that?" And I had never thought about it because I just write. And I thought about it and came up with the idea that when I was in the theater and studying theater and acting, we did a lot of improvisations. And some of those improvisations, we were men, we were women, we were young, we were old. You did whatever situation was given to you. And I think what may be happening when I write is that I do little improvisations in my head as I'm writing. I always see what I'm writing, and I think that's important. It's almost like a film when I'm trying to put words down on paper. And I've been criticized for that because I've heard that, you're too specific about certain things, but I want the reader to be able to see it, hear it too. I did get a great comment from Les Standiford, who's a well-known novelist and nonfiction writer, and he said, "You made me hear the Low Country" when he read Low Country Boyle. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. I succeeded in that case. But I think as far as a voice, yeah, I think I do. I think I hear every line that's spoken that I write. And that's why I put in probably too many adjectives and adverbs and too many he smiled or she smiled or, a lot of writers criticize me for that. But I'm sorry. I want you to see it like I see it.
So hearing or letting your readers hear the Low Country, you're a visual thinker. If you had to say, what do you think some of the greatest lines you've ever written would be?
Oh, wow. Well, I think probably the greatest, and it came to me out of the blue. A writer has little miracles happen, and this dropped out of the sky. And I had a scene in which a female character, Karen Chaney, has brought Sam Larkin to Louisiana where he's not supposed to be under false pretenses. And the day he gets there, he tells her he's leaving, and she says, "Why?" He said, "Because you're not looking at me." And she says, "What does that have to do with it?" And he said, "The truth doesn't require any thought. Only lies do." And I thought, wow, Carl, that's a pretty good line. And there have been others that have been dropped on me, some that are funny, some that are deeper. That's probably the deepest line I ever wrote.
Do you have like children, it's difficult to ask if you have a favorite, but if you had to select a favorite from your books, would there be one?
Probably Low Country Boyle, because it started the series. It gave me my first real success in my borderline career. Also, the very first book I wrote, Nothing Left to Lose, which was about the music business and was largely based on my experiences in the music business. I mean, it's fiction, it's a novel, but the fact that it was the first and that it was published, and I think you don't ever really overcome that first little bit of success, even though the publisher went bankrupt the day the book was published. But that's another story. But Low Country Boyle has amazingly sold well for over 10 years, and that's a long shelf life for a book. I think it established the characters of Sam Larkin and Karen Chaney, and they are my best friends almost.
You said you're working on something right now, another book, and so I would ask you, what is it you have yet to write?
Well, I'm actually working on two books. One is Pat Conroy once told me, he said, "Carl, you write faction," because so many of my books have some relationship to actual events. And one, which I haven't worked on in a little while, it's well along, is about a disappearance in Hilton Head, which is an unsolved case. A man and wife disappeared. They never found the bodies. They have a theory of what happened, and they cast blame on someone, but that someone committed suicide, so they don't really know. And yet everyone that I know in Hilton Head, where I lived for a short time, seems to name the same person who's responsible, and it's not the one who committed suicide. So that tweaked my interest. The new Larkin book is going to be, although I write character-driven books, this is going to be even more character-driven. There's not going to be as much suspense in it. But the backstory will have, because you have to have a primary story which usually involves the characters themselves and their personal feelings and interests and relationships. And then you have a backstory, which some people would call a plot or something to gather the interest of the reader. That's required of everybody, even Fitzgerald and Hemingway. But the backstory of this one is about human trafficking, which people don't realize is the second largest criminal conspiracy other than drugs in the world. I have difficulty doing the research for it because the research is so dark. I won't make it that dark in the book because I think people would be offended by it. That's what I'm working on right at the moment is the new Sam Larkin book, the fifth in the series, and that will be the backstory. But there will also be major personal revelations about Karen and Sam in the book, how we deal with emotional experiences. Now, I don't want to give anything away, but some pretty heavy emotional experience.
Do we have a working title?
No.
To be determined.
Right now it's Larkin 5.
Okay. Speaking of Larkin 5, a lot of your readers would love to know, will, drumroll, Sam Larkin and Karen Chaney end up together?
Well, that is being addressed deeply in this book. It was hinted at in Matthews Island that they're both thinking about this. And the biggest conflict they have is that Sam is quite happy living out, some people would call it the boonies. It's not. It's based on where I lived on Fripp Island in South Carolina. But it's, it's near the ocean. It's on the lake. Karen, who's been a DEA agent all of her life, and she likes to live on the edge. And Sam has had enough of the edge. He doesn't really want the edge. So that's a resolution they have to come to. Will they come to it in this book? How the hell do I know? I don't plan ahead. They'll tell me what they're going to do. But that will certainly be a conflict that will be addressed in this book, and the resolution will be whether they, commit or not. There is a scene I'm looking forward to writing, which I've just thought about. It's not a plan, and that's a traditional Cajun wedding in Louisiana that they will go to. So that will also bring things to the surface. We'll see.
The infamous "we'll see." What would you want people to know about you, about Carl T. Smith, that maybe the back of the book doesn't really tell them?
Well, with theater, music, and writing, I've really taken all of the stable career paths. But I think that probably my dedication to the arts and things artful, that I have been very, very privileged, not financially, but with the people I've been able to come into contact with, the people who have helped me. And that hit me at Book Expo a few years back when I was sitting in the green room waiting to do a signing, and I'm sitting there talking to Nelson DeMille, Dennis Lehane, and Gene Hackman, who had written the book. And I'm thinking, Carl, you're really out of your neighborhood at this point in time. But I think if I could say one thing that is most important to me is how grateful I am for what I've been able to experience, for the, quote, talents, unquote, that I've been given. And I feel that to not use them is a disservice, so I use them. Other than that, I don't know what's important about me that anyone should know, other than I've never been able to run away from a challenge. I mean, my daddy, bless his heart, said, if you can't swim upstream, don't go in the water, and that's kind of the way I've lived. It's been a wild trip. I would like people to say, well, he didn't take the road most traveled. And the little miracles, that happen that I mentioned before, I have come to believe things through my characters. Sam Larkin says you meet the people you're supposed to meet. I believe that. Quick little incident that happened. For a while I taught school in New Jersey when I was trying to put grits on the table and build an acting career. And one of my students from way back then sent me an email the other day. In the book Matthews Island, there is a character that's in the book briefly, and he was a member of a squadron during the Vietnam War called the Wild Weasels, which was almost a suicide squadron. They were pilots who had to find out where SAM missiles were stored, and the only way they could find it out was to have one fired at them. So they had more than a 50% mortality rate. Well, I get this email from this ex-student of mine, and his profile picture on Facebook was a wild weasel's patch, and he served with them in Vietnam. And I got this email long after I had written the book, and his name was Cassidy. And in the book, ironically, this pilot, after having survived Vietnam, is killed by a criminal named Cassidy. Now, how do you put those things together? I rely on little miracles, and I think everyone should. And if you look for them, they'll happen.
Actor, director, singer, author, writer. Welcome to the neighborhood. Carl T. Smith, thank you.
Well, I am honored that you asked me, and thank you.